This is the room where the Philippine Coast Guard speaks directly to the world's media about exactly what goes on in the West Philippine and South China Sea. Join us, Taiwan Talks, for an exclusive with Philippine Coast Guard spokesperson Jay Tarriela. Today it's my privilege to be joined by Commodore Jay Tarriela. He's the Philippine spokesperson for the Coast Guard in the West Philippine Sea. Commodore Tarriela, very warm welcome to Taiwan Talks today.
Thank you for dropping by to my office for us to amplify the transparency strategy of the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea.
Going to the Shangri-La dialogue, so obviously, you know, being a Coast Guard yourself and being a spokesperson, you are on the front line of the ongoing, long and ongoing confrontations. What particularly spoke to you from President Marcos's speech?
As a Filipino, as a Coast Guard officer, I know where the President stands. And I know that he is really committed in pushing for the rule of law, convincing the international community that we are all at stake here. The West Philippine Sea is not just a regional issue that has to be talked about by countries within the region, but it should involve not just the United States, Japan, Australia, even the European Union, because the global trade passes here. And besides from the importance of it to the global trade, the most important part is this is a testing case, how countries are really committed in pushing for the rule of law in the international law, right? If we're going to allow China as a rising power for them to get away with their disregard of the international law, for them to get away in bullying smaller countries like the Philippines and other Southeast Asian countries, we go back to the system before the First and Second World War, wherein stronger nations have a justifiable reason for them to take whatever seas, whatever land that they have.
Do you think that the world will return to the law of the jungle?
Yeah, I think it would embolden countries like Russia, like China, to do whatever they want to do because they can do it. It's about time that all of us will come together and tell China, you cannot just do whatever you want. We have to adhere to the law. We have to minimize our illegal actions because there are a set of norms that you have to align to.
So the world is at a watershed, a turning point.
Well, that I've always been mentioning that our fight for the West Philippine Sea is not just a fight for our country. This is actually a fight for countries that support the international law. This is a fight for those like-minded states that really enjoys the rules-based order we're in right now. Because that one is actually under threat.
Does that then give you a direct link to Ukraine?
Well, President Zelensky visited President Marcos yesterday, right? And I think they have the same message with the Shangri-La dialogue that President Zelensky and President Marcos mentioned, that we all have to abide with international law. We should not allow bully countries like, Russia and China to justify their actions because they just can't do it. Their international law should be still regarded as an equalizer of all nations.
All the incidents from China and on the Philippine side, there's been an effort to coin these, to describe and to say this is not just grey zone, but it is illegal, coercive, aggressive, deceptive. Can you give us a sense of what it's like for these people who need to go out onto the ocean, onto the waters?
Well, at least I can be able to illustrate how hard it is for us, right? Right now, we have a Philippine Coast Guard vessel anchored in Sabina Shoal. It was a very...
Sabina Shoal on the
Yes,
international...
Sabina Shoal, yeah. It's a very decisive move on the part of our commandant to send our flagship, the 97-meter vessel, in Sabina Shoal because of the intelligence report that there is an ongoing small-scale reclamation by the People's Republic of China in Sabina Shoal.
Right.
So right now...
They are trying to build that island out.
Yes, there is an intelligence report that they are carrying out small-scale reclamation. That was reported last April. So try to imagine from April until now, our Coast Guard vessel is still there, patrolling, ensuring that China will get caught doing the reclamation activities. So it's already June. So more than 45 days that our personnel are still there. Besides from patrolling that area, they are also subjected to harassment of the Chinese Coast Guard vessels, the Chinese maritime militia, and all sorts of staffs that they are doing there in these particular areas. There are also moments that the smaller vessels, like 44-meter vessels, are deployed to do the resupply mission in support of the Armed Forces of the Philippines' presence in BRP Sierra Madre. We have also experienced now water cannoning in Scarborough Shoal. It is also very difficult on our part because the guidance of the President is that despite of the bullying tactics of the Chinese Coast Guard or the Chinese Maritime Militia, you have to maintain your temper. You still have to deal with them professionally. That we have to maintain the moral high ground compared to the bullying tactics of China. So that's how difficult it is.
Yeah, I mean, when it was at the height of the water cannoning, I remember that you had said to the press that this is exactly what President Marcos' strategy is. His policy is not to escalate, so not to use water cannon back. Before we go on to the water cannon, I wanted to ask to go back to Sabina or Shoal. This is only 75 nautical miles from Palawan. So would this be the most audacious grab from China?
Well, if we're going to look at the proximity, yes. This is the closest reported small-scale reclamation of China in Palawan. 75 nautical miles, as you mentioned. And this is very important for us because you can probably remember that Sabina Shoal, or Escoda Shoal, that's actually a rendezvous point whenever we proceed to Ayungin Shoal. So it's just like a direct westerly sail from Escoda going to Ayungin. And then a few miles after Ayungin is you have Mischief Reef, which is also the naval base of the People's Republic of China that they took from us in 1995. So if ever they'll be successful in taking over Sabina Shoal, it will be easier for them to encircle the entire Ayungin Shoal because you have Mischief Reef on the left and then Sabina Shoal on the right. And then Ayungin is in the center.
Right. So it's very strategic.
Yes.
In one of the local papers today, I believe it's the Manila Times, a spokesperson for one of the fishing groups says that they don't want so-called the militarization of the West Philippine Sea. And what they appear to be referring to is the joint drills or patrols of the Philippines with other nations.
Well, you know, whenever a pro-China narrative saying that, you know, the militarization, just like what you mentioned, is actually the one endangering the safety and security of the Filipino fishermen. Because they don't want joint drills, they don't want balikatan exercise. But in reality, if we're really going to go to these coastal communities, whether in Zambales or in Pangasinan or in Palawan, they would tell you outright what is really happening in the West Philippine Sea. And there are two things that you would really know. One, it's really difficult, regardless whose administration is, whether during the time President Duterte or President Marcos now, because what is the constant here is that the Chinese are still harassing the Filipino fishermen, regardless who the sitting president was. And also, with the impact of the Balikatan exercise, with more countries coming in, I think what is being affected with this kind of joint coalition of nations to counter Chinese aggressive action is just the People's Republic of China.
Do you see that then as a failure of China's strategy, the fact that this has happened, or do you see that as success of the Philippine strategy?
Well, for me, the transparency strategy is very effective because for so many years, we have allowed China to be carrying out different actions without the international community knowing it. Not a single nation in Southeast Asia have exposed to the world that China is violating our sovereignty and sovereign rights, that China is bullying ordinary fishermen, that China is destroying the marine environment. It's only this time, during the time President Bongbong Marcos. So if the question is this successful enough? I think so. Because it's not just our traditional ally like the United States, Japan, and Australia that visits here in the Philippines and expressing their commitment in supporting the modernization of the military, for example. Even the European Union as a whole are expressing their support.
Is that how you measure the effectiveness of this campaign? It's the international support.
I think, the 6 years of the Duterte administration, from 2016 to 2022, very limited information was provided to the Filipino people. So the impact of that kind of limited information and downplaying these incidents have gave the Filipino people a misinformed appreciation of what's really happening. There came a point that the Filipinos no longer believe that the Filipino fishermen are still being harassed, that the Coast Guard and the Armed Forces of the Philippines are having a hard time patrolling our own exclusive economic zone. So for President Bongbong Marcos, with the transparency strategy that we have now, the most positive impact that we can say is that more Filipinos are becoming more aware of what's happening. With the result of the last survey about the Filipinos' awareness of the West Philippine Sea, almost like 72%.
Your critics would say that, but the end result is that it is making China more aggressive.
That's not true. I would always argue that whatever aggression that we are facing now has also been carried out by China during the time of the previous administration. The only difference is that we're talking about it now. More people are becoming aware of what's happening. But, last month, for example, I released, it's because the National Security Advisor, Eduardo Año, declassified the photos and videos that were reported by the Coast Guard to the National Task Force way back in 2017 to 2022, wherein sea turtles are also being captured, the giant clams are being harvested, the entire destruction of the marine environment in Scarborough Shoal. We have reported that, but the previous administration did not release that to the public.
President Marcos was asked at Shangri-La whether a civilian death in the West Philippine Sea would be a red line. Now, South China Morning Post are reporting that Chinese scientists are developing AI-controlled water cannon for the South China Sea. So in your view, how close are we to an actual fatality in the West Philippine Sea?
My response to this is that since we don't respond with a water cannon action of China, whether they use AI or whether they use human to control their water cannon, there's no difference. It's still a water cannon.
But it's going to be more accurate. So it's going to hit the boats more times than it does now. That's the fear. And we're talking about, as I've researched, a 9-ton force on a man. That would seem to me to be lethal.
Well, China has, just like the Philippines, or even the United States, or even Taiwan, or any other claimant state in Southeast Asia, I don't think that China is willing to cross that Rubicon line. I don't think China would be...
But it might by error.
Yes.
By mistake.
They might. But if we're going to look at the bullying behavior of China, all the actions that they have been doing since then and now are all possible scenarios of a much more escalatory action if uncalculated. Like, for example, the danger of collision. It might also kill one of our sailors, but they're still doing it. With calibration or not, ramming or collision is always a possibility of a casualty on board our Coast Guard vessel. Exercises is already a headache for them. What more if there will be a hot war, including the United States? So that is something that I don't foresee. China is really willing to cross that threshold.
When it comes to Second Thomas Shoal, one American security expert has suggested, now this might seem extreme at first, he suggested that the Sierra Madre be replaced with a combined forward operating base used by the Philippines and the US. And his argument is that this would be better, it would be much better for the Philippines and the US to have short-term escalation rather than China to have the long-term gain. What do you make of that?
You know, President Bongbong Marcos has always been wanting to maintain the status quo of our maritime features. We do not have so much escalatory construction of maritime features, particularly in those we occupy. Like, for example, if even before President Bongbong Marcos, I think the Philippines has a very conservative approach in constructing different capability that we have in those maritime features that we occupy. President Bongbong Marcos also keeps on mentioning that we're not going to escalate the tension, we're not going to carry out actions that would provoke any, not just China, but any other claimant states in the South China Sea.
But China says it is provoked. China says that the Philippines is provoking by having these joint drills.
You know, China has always been deceptive about their own narratives. Sometimes they're even confused with their own lies. That's the funny thing about it. I mean, how can the Philippines provoke them? They have larger vessels. Whenever we deploy 44-meter vessel, they're going to deploy 3 100-meter vessels. I mean, where is the provocation there? We send Filipino fishermen in Bajo de Masinloc with the civil society. They sent 50, 10 China Coast Guard vessel, 30 Chinese maritime militia, 3 PLA Navy warship to prevent a civil society. Where is the provocation there? They're just probably equipped with fishing nets, right? And fishing equipment. And all of the vessels that they have are sophisticated in terms of the military hardware. So I don't really understand the threshold of provocation for China. What China really wants for Southeast Asia is that they can do whatever they want. We do stupid things, we do illegal things, we harass your people. You just have to be silent about it. And you're a good friend for them. That's not provocation.
So do you see this, that it is a sign of the Philippine strategy's success?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very successful because before, as I said, you know, it's very difficult for President Bongbong Marcos to ask support from the international community because in 2016, when the landmark arbitral award was already decided, most of the national leaders from the European Union and other like-minded states started doubting the interests of the Philippines, whether we are really serious in pushing for our position or fight in the West Philippine Sea, because we didn't use so much about the arbitral award. So for President Bongbong Marcos to once again court the support of European Union, for him to fulfill his promise of not surrendering a square inch, he has to expose the illegal actions. And I think the other greatest contribution of the transparency strategy is that before, maritime security scholars keep on describing China's action as gray zone, short of war. But because of the transparency efforts that we're doing, we don't call it gray zone anymore. We just call it outright violation of the international law, violation of UNCLOS, violation of collision regulation, violation of the damage to the environment. All of this are just violation and complete blatant disregard of the international law.
Just going back to the propaganda. So you have dismissed China's narratives. But can you tell me, is that propaganda war, is it actually very difficult to win this propaganda war with Beijing? Or is it easy?
You know, it's very easy to counter a lie. We just have to tell the truth.
But it's also easy for them to keep repeating until people believe them.
We just have to keep on telling the truth. There's so many instances that they have used deception, lies, to downplay whatever incidents that they have, pretending that they're the ones who are just carrying out law enforcement. And
that
then
they
a
are
few
peaceful.
minutes after, I'm going to post it in Twitter that they are the ones provoking the Philippine Coast Guard, harassing the Filipino fishermen, and then that's it. It's already an end of line for them. We don't care how many mouthpieces of lies that they are going to use, because the truth is what really matters for the people, not just for the Filipinos, but for the entire global community.
And is that propaganda war as intense, would you say, as the kinetic confrontations?
I don't think so.
Can I ask, have you been personally targeted by Beijing?
A few weeks after we started transparency, so February to March of 2020, there were already like 350. Right now, there are more than 10,300 created social media identities just to counter whatever post that I have. So there are issues that they are throwing at me, like one, I'm a CIA. So that's the most stupid lies that they came up with, because I don't really look like I'm James Bond or something, right? So that's the first one. They said I'm CIA. I went to the United States for a fellowship after my PhD, and according to them, that's where I got recruited. So those are the two personally created stories to harm my reputation and credibility as a spokesperson. Other than that, they cannot think of any other way.
In your view, what is the role and parameters of a Coast Guard, and how does the Chinese Coast Guard operate that is in line with this or different to this?
Well, the Philippine Coast Guard is pretty much like the United States Coast Guard, and even Taiwan, and even Japan. We believe that the relevance of the Coast Guard has something to do with maritime governance. The other question probably is, why is the Coast Guard maintaining your presence in the West Philippine Sea? And for us, it's because we go back to our agreement in the region that nobody's going to militarize the dispute. That's why you can see Vietnam using Coast Guard vessels now, also Malaysia and the Philippines. Our Coast Guard vessels support maritime governance. We are not military. Our intention is just to maintain a rules-based order with a common understanding that you're not supposed to provoke or endanger other people's lives. China is completely different. They are the deviant Coast Guard organization. They use water cannon to endanger people's lives. They use China Coast Guard vessels to harass the Filipino fishermen. They use Coast Guard vessels to endanger the resupply mission of the armed forces of the Philippines and the Philippine Coast Guard. So, for us, China Coast Guard vessel is not, it's like we're a circle of friends. We share common ideals, and China doesn't fall with that kind of common ideals of what the Coast Guard should be.
You mentioned Taiwan. Obviously, Taiwan also shares similar experience to the Philippines in terms of the threats to sovereignty from China. Are the Philippine and Taiwan Coast Guards cooperating?
Yes, we have a lot of cooperation. The Philippine Coast Guard officers are being sent to Taiwan for a master's program. I think we also have one Coast Guard legal officer, a lawyer, was also doing PhD now in Taiwan, supported through scholarship of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Taiwan. We also have cadetship, wherein a Coast Guard,
Are there any joint drills?
we have, particularly in search and rescue.
And anything further than that?
Farther than that, well, we have different proposals to be able to support the capability of the Philippine Coast Guard.
So last year was the first time that there were drills between Coast Guards. Are there any upcoming Coast Guard drills?
It was the first one, trilateral. It's
okay.
Japan, the United States, and the Philippines last year. So right now, we intend to replicate that kind of exercise this year. Hopefully, it will happen by June or July.
So very soon. And finally, I'm sure that you've been asked this 100 times, but is there anything that keeps you up at night?
Well, yeah. What keeps me up at night is that for the Filipino people to understand how relevant our fight is for the West Philippine Sea. I want our next generation of the Filipinos, because the main question is that some of the pro-China trolls or the pro-China supporters would say, we should not talk about the West Philippine Sea anymore. We cannot do anything about it. In our generation, we have to hold the line to make sure that the next generation of the Filipinos would still understand that the West Philippine Sea is something that we need to talk about every day, so that the next generation of Filipinos would still say, we need to continue the fight, because this is the fight that even the national heroes before we had independence is what they fought for. If we're going to, give up now and just be silent about the Chinese harassment, I don't think that the next generation of Filipinos would also care. And that is something that keeps me awake and make me realize to continue the fight, for me not to get tired in mentioning and exposing the illegal action of China. Because this fight is not for me. This fight is for our children.
Okay. Thank you so much, Commodore J. Tarriela, for your time today.
Thank you.
Overseas airbase for nearly 5 decades. It's 2 hours north of Manila, 1 hour from Subic Bay. With China undermining Philippine sovereignty in the South China Sea and Manila turning toward its US alliance, we're here to find out what direction the Philippines is going in.